Okay, I'm really so happy to see you. You and I have had quite a chuckle in the last 5 minutes. Thought we'd turn the video recorder on.
Of course, of course, of
And
course.
one of the reasons that I really like to talk about you is because I get to meet let us say, the brand new face of the enemy face to face. Philosophy.
that's that's hilarious. I really think that. Well, I don't know. I'm happy to stand for philosophy
Uh-huh.
and to give my
Well,
say because it really has. I don't know. Like I said, I think it's wonderful. So,
Well, the
of
reason that I called it that was again a joke,
course.
because as we have discussed prior to this as well as this time, is that the reason why philosophy has so much weight in our society is because they continue to ask the really weighty questions and still don't come up with actual answers. If they did come up with the answers, then the philosophy department would get closed down because they had already solved all the problems. See, and that's in fact what I run across in computer science and engineering. That's one of the reasons why I migrated into contracting, because the contractors are interested in getting the job paid, getting the job done, to where people who work for a corporation, they don't really care whether the company gets its work done or not. They've got a job, okay? But the contractors have got a time limit. We got to get that thing out the door by that amount of time. And so I kind of enjoyed it that way
Interesting.
because there was a finish to it, that we had something to do and we knew where we were going with it, to where often that's not the case. And that's also true with engineering. I mean, you're either going to build that bridge or not, right? And that we know when that bridge is built because it's going to have traffic on it later, right? That's the
Yeah.
whole point. But that's not the That's kind of the problem with both religion and philosophy, is where's the traffic? They're still building the bridge.
But don't you see that as very interesting? I don't know, in terms of like, um, because I don't know, just in terms of like, I don't know, um, you valuing engineering for kind of being goal oriented, but also valuing Buddhism for nothing to do, nowhere to go.
Yeah, that's the whole point of the bridge, is finish doing it and you're done with it.
Right.
And now you've got it. That's the whole thing. So the job well done in this case is to clean the house. And now you've
Interesting.
got a nice house to live in. Okay. But the whole point of philosophy is, let's buy another book, put it on the bookshelf. And a lot of philosophy gets mixed in with religion and all. So I guess that, yeah, that's the whole thing, is that why, when we can see for ourselves what's going on and we keep evaluating it and we keep seeing the way that it is, it just leave it that way. Because you could say that philosophy, in a way, is just more whataboutisms that people have throughout their lives. Well, what if this is wrong? Or what if that goes wrong? Or maybe I forgot that piece of paper? Or let me go check to see? Or all of this doing things repetitive over and over again when there's really nothing to do.
Interesting.
You could say that also, that it happens with planned obsolescence of automobiles. They want you to keep buying their cars next year, so they're going to make this one surprisingly ugly so that you buy it on the surprise and sell it on the ugly.
Totally. Well, I suppose one thing to mention is that they're pretty much the history of philosophy can be pretty much summed up by big philosophers coming in and writing big books and saying, "This is it. No more philosophy because I've
And
solved it."
everybody else in the world will will attack him for years, and now
Yeah.
we've got the whole thing rolling again. That's the whole point.
Uh,
And generally, for so, that's because they're probably wrong.
they're
That the
always
fact
wrong.
is, yeah, they're always wrong because they're always being philosophers at it anyway. That what, like I've said before in a teasing way, the philosophy schools need to be populated by professors emeritus in engineering.
I know the engineering professors would love that. I'm sure they would. I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, that's pretty much what's happening. Like, STEM takes over, humanities gets pushed out. Like, in a way, that's happening. It's happening because of capitalism. So.
Oh no, yes, I can understand that, but I was thinking of it totally from the different position of that the engineers make a joke out of it, capitalize on the fact that they can create capital. And philosophy just keeps stirring the pot, and they don't come up with any solutions, any correct things. They don't come up with a product. They don't come up with an actual answer. They just keep asking the same old questions over and over again. And in fact, the engineers could go in and clean house by answering most of the important questions that philosophers keep asking and set them straight.
But that's the thing. Like, do you know about Wittgenstein?
No, who?
He was a 20th century philosopher, and he was actually an engineer. And he did that. He tried to do that exact thing. He was like, "Y'all philosophers don't know anything. I'm coming in here. I'm an engineer. I'm gonna solve this all." He wrote this. He wrote this big book called the Logicus Tractatus. Then he was like, "I'm done. This is it. Philosophy is over." And it was like, it was just completely wrong. So,
Anyway,
if
you
whenever they
started.
engage with philosophy, you're gonna have to do philosophy. So it's like you can't really end philosophy by doing philosophy, right? I mean, it just happens over and over.
Right. It's like what was her name that had the sock puppets back in the 1960s, and they kept having the same song over and over again, and the name of the song was "The Song Never Ends."
Exactly.
It's a song that never ends.
Yeah.
And it goes on and on and on like that. So that's the whole quality, though, of the philosophy. But you were going to tell a story about uh, Christianity in response to one of the stories I told you.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, again, people can have this view, but I'll just say I was talking to someone once, and they were the head of a Republican club at a university. Actually, a super really nice person. I could tell that they were actually legitimately a really good-hearted person. They had a very intense family. I'll just put it like that. That had a lot of expectations on them, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, they grew up within this context, and they told me something very surprising. We were talking about religion because they were always trying to get me, and always trying to make me conservative and see things their way, which is fair enough. I like, I'm not against interacting with other people's opinions. And we were having a discussion. It was me, one other person, and this other person talking about this. And I asked them, we were talking about because I think both of them were actually arguing that if there was no God, there would be no morality, because God is what grounds morality. And I asked them, so does that mean, I asked this person, if there was no God and I killed this person, that wouldn't be wrong? And they said yes. And I was like, that's a lot. That's intense. Like, whew. But again, they have their reasoning.
But did you go down then the aisle of? But if someone, let us say the two of them standing there, if one of them died right there on the spot due to murder, would the other one like that or not like it?
I didn't ask that.
With or without whether or not God said that it was wrong. So if there is no God and they're left with just the circumstances, then how do they feel about it? Do they feel embarrassed, shame, frightened? What kind of feeling do you have when somebody that's standing next to you just gets his head blown off or something by a sniper?
That's an interesting question.
Okay, because now they have to exactly examine their own feelings
Mhm.
about it, which is really where morality always comes from, is things that we like and we don't like, but they're trying to make it a hardcore reality by saying that, oh, it's not how I feel, it's God said so. Well, now what we can think of also is the idea of um, mutual consent in a group. Because if everybody that's standing around and sees that guy getting his head blown off, nobody there is going to like that. Probably even the guy who did the blowing, that no one there is happy about that situation. And so we can see that that kind of consensus, if we see that our surroundings are our God, and that we can see the way that things are accepted right there. But we're not always going to get 100% consensus, because it is possible that the guy who did the shooting is now happy. He thought that it was a good thing that he had done. Okay. And so now you have, but the conflict is not a philosophical question at all. It is it's not even a moral question. It's a feeling question. How do you feel about what's going on? This is where the Buddha comes in such a remarkable way, in the quality of paticcasamuppāda, that we understand now that the three basic feelings that we have, basic feelings, is the feeling I like it, or the feeling of pleasure, the feeling of discomfort, or the feeling of confusion, and the sixth that it's mixed, or I don't know which one. You can get that sometimes when Westerners will come to Thailand and then get a drink off the street, and they'll taste that thing and they don't know whether they like it or not.
So,
And we're often that way with new foods, new vegetables, new ways of cooking and all of that. We get really confused about it. We don't know whether we like it or not. But we also have that with facts or information. That is, in fact, what a joke is all about, is right up until the point of the punchline, is when we're following along thinking we know what's going on, and then the punchline, and there's a moment of confusion, and then resolution.
yeah.
And it's that confusion that causes that resolution into laughter, because some people don't get the joke and they're just staying confused, and they don't like not knowing what the joke is, right? So this is that feeling of confusion. So going back to the liking, that we like things, that if we do that ignorantly, then tanha, the Vedana turns to tanha, which means if I like it, that means I want it. And if I want things that I don't have, then that's the definition of suffering, having to have desires for things that we don't have. And if we have the desire for something that we don't have, that's when the danger of issues of morality will come in. That if I want it bad enough, I'll do bad enough things to get it.
Sure.
And I'll hurt people to do that. Okay. So this is also where we get to point of, if I like it, it must be good, and I'm bad without it. Or if I like it and I will be good to go if I get it, then that thing that I want must be good. And if I don't like the feeling of something, then it's easy for me to say, then that thing is bad. Like sitting down in a regular, let us say, a plastic chair like this one, and as we sit down, somebody happens to slip a shoe in, and now we're sitting on the shoe. We don't like the feeling of sitting on the shoe, and so we take the shoe and we throw it because we don't like the shoe. That's the connection that we make. If I don't like what something is associated with, then I don't like that thing, which makes that thing now bad. This is where morality comes from. It comes from feelings. And this is how the human mind works. And I can understand that Christianity don't want to know this.
Yeah, totally.
Because they already have a list of rules that they think that God has posted already, except that Christians still have issues of morality about, where does God draw the line? And the answer to that within Buddhism, the Buddha's got a simple answer to that. You draw the line where if you go further than that, you would have crossed the line that should have been there in the first place. In other words, if you harm someone, or even if you're harming yourself, if you're doing things that are unsatisfying and unsatisfactory, then let's take a look at that so that we can make some improvements on it. That's like in engineering, if you find a place where there is stress and metal gets fatigued, that's one of the things about metal is that it does get fatigued when it gets stressed. And so you have to make sure that whatever stress that the metal is under is not under so much stress that it will become weak due to that stress. Simple engineering point. Right? No need for philosophers to philosophize about, is that strut big enough or not? And so this is the whole quality of morality, is saying that when morality comes from an outside source that's independent of the object that it is applying this rule to, that's when they're subject to a lot of mistakes. And that's what philosophy has been doing. They're trying to apply rules basically that they gave each other, thinking that they came from a higher source. Which is, because basically modern philosophy came out of medieval Christianity. The Christians were the ones who started philosophy because they couldn't answer the questions that ordinary people were asking them.
Wow.
Like 3-in-1, and I'm not talking about shoe polish.
Yeah, that's funny. um, well, I really like. There's you said a lot, so there's a lot to respond to. I'd say one paper that I really enjoyed, and because it was so difficult, but I think really draws kind of exactly to what you're saying, and I think would really kind of mesh with what you're saying, is a journal, I guess, yeah, some philosophy paper by someone who said, let's consider what she was interested in, whether or not there are ethical truths that are true independent of whether or not we say they are. So like we think that line, well, she uses, okay, I guess we'll use murder is wrong, right? That's the Buddhist, everyone agrees murder is wrong, right? So what she's trying to figure out is whether or not
until you join the army. Until you join the police force.
Yeah, totally. So there's always going to be qualifications.
Well, that's the whole point. You said that you started off with getting me to convince that murder was wrong, big time, and we're
Sure.
saying yes, but that's not a universal mental position.
Right. Let's say murder of innocent people or something. It's going to be it's.
Putin thinks that that's a very good thing to do.
Right. Well, yeah, that's a good point. But
okay, but a lot of people. So we have to go back to the point about the general consensus, because
Sure.
there's always going to be outliers.
Of course.
There's always going to be armies, simply because all of those people who think murder is wrong really think that there's excuses to do it sometimes. I think murder is totally wrong, but I will kill,
Yeah.
sometimes gleefully.
Yeah.
Okay. How do I say that? Well, just by breathing in and out.
Right. Of course. The bugs. I found a bug in my salad today.
Yeah, I found a bug in my salad today. That bug is dead.
Very dead. But
So we don't care about bugs. So clearly, murder totally is not the point. Every one of us has a murderous instinct.
well, that's
Every one of, okay, right. And so are we going to go by instinct or are we going to go by wisdom?
definitely.
Wisdom would say that it is generally, in almost all cases, wrong to murder. But wisdom would still say generally in almost all cases. It wouldn't say 100% of the time.
Mhm. Definitely. But so let's take that as
All right.
our as
Let's
our
go for that. Okay.
our
Generally,
guys. So
almost 100% of the time.
almost right, almost 100% of the time, murder. Let's put it to humans too, so we don't have to get into the human animal distinction, or even plants. You can murder a plant. um,
The monks are not allowed even to cut plants, but you see, that's not a law against restrictions on plants. It's using that mental restriction that the Brahmins and the Jains had to the advantage of the monks.
of course, yeah.
So now they don't have to cut grass. You don't have to have gardeners. Monks don't have to garden. They've got a rule against it. They can't build, they can't, they've got rules against the things, and so that makes their life really, really easy.
Totally. Yeah, I could have used that rule when I was younger.
Yeah, oh, I don't cut plants.
Yeah.
Or what would our food industry be like if there were no killing of animals?
It'd be way
That
better.
in fact humans do, and Christians who think that murder is wrong, thou shalt not kill, is a thing in the Bible. And yet it is done regularly. I mean, people go around killing plants just because the grass is too tall. It's because of an eyesore of the human that they go around killing a lot of plants. A lot of animals that way die too. In fact, that's what most happens with stray dogs. They get killed.
Mm.
And that seems to be quite all right with our society, including all of the Christians in the society that have that great big rule in the book that says, thou shalt not kill. And it's really true, even for humans. We'll say, okay, well, we'll make it for humans. And then that young Christian gets drafted and gets a gun.
Yeah.
Now he's going to, and his parents are going to be quite okay with that.
Yeah. But I'll try to go through it quickly. So we have
Okay, all right. Sorry, I'm just
that's
destroying your whole quality of
that's all right.
absolute rules that come from some god or something.
Well, no, that's exactly what it's about. So we have like the proposition: murder is almost and always wrong in 99% of cases. There might be some exceptions, but very much in general. So we have that idea. Is that true, independent of whether or not humans think it's true? So is that like 2 + 2 = 4, where that is a truth that, whether or not humans think that 2 + 2 = 4, 2 + 2 still equals 4, right? Or is that something more like red means stop, where it's more of
All right,
just
here's the answer to that. The answer is that 2 + 2 = 4 is, number one, a human construction, and number two, without the humans, irrelevant, because animals don't count. They just know bigger and smaller. That's all they know. And we
Right.
know that monkeys know that because they get fed based upon touching something on the screen. Like this time, he's going to have to touch only green dots. Next time, he has to touch the biggest squares, that kind of stuff. So they can figure that kind of stuff out. But actual mathematics, they generally don't have it. So without humans, there not only is no, let us say, the human universal language of mathematics is irrelevant without humans to speak and to know that language of mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The same is true with morality. That this is, in fact, a alligator eat alligator, dog eat dog, and human eat human world.
Right. But again, that's let me just quickly go through it, because that's again, that's the whole point of the paper, is to say that exact thing. So it's asking whether or not this, but it is interesting whether or not this is whether or not truth, well, whether or not it's true independent of humans, whether or not we think it is, because we want to be able to think, well, even if like humans thought that murder wasn't wrong, like it was part of our psychology that murder is fine, and we went around murdering each other, that would still, we want to say, people still murdering each other would still be wrong, right? In terms of what we think now, in terms of like it, murder is pretty gruesome. It's hard to see someone being murdered and not say, that is wrong, whether or not those people thought that it was wrong at the time.
It depends upon how you use the word wrong.
Right.
And the word wrong here has to do with how much you feel about it being wrong. That's what the word wrong means, is when somebody says that it's wrong because they don't like it. And if they say it wrong with a great big capital W-O, capital R, capital G, then you can put a God in there someplace by capitalizing on it, to where, in fact, what's really going on is it's wrong, and it's really wrong because I have really negative feelings about it. That's the reality of the situation. And that the ignorance of people will bring gods and absolutes and all of that kind of thing into play. But the reality is that we can find groups of people who will get together to chant together how wrong it is. Okay, starvation is wrong because the people who are starving don't like it. But normally, and I got several examples of that. One of them was in the time of the Buddha. There was a famine and starvation. Had to do more with weather. In Sri Lanka right now, there is a huge famine going on in Sri Lanka right now. You know why? Do you know that there is, in fact, a major, major crisis in Sri Lanka?
No.
There's two components to it. One is that they did not pay the Chinese the money that they owed the Chinese, and so the Chinese took over their number one port, and so now there's not imported stuff coming in, but they could feed themselves if the government had not made a rule saying, "Oh, we're going to go totally 100% organic," and banned and made illegal fertilizers and all kinds of stuff. And so now Sri Lanka is starving, right?
I wonder
Is
if the
starvation
Ukraine has
wrong?
anything to do with that as well.
Pardon?
I wonder if the Ukraine situation has anything to do with that as well, whether or not they
Well,
buy.
no, Ukraine has got the exact opposite because they're the breadbasket. You've got a half a
Right.
dozen countries that are starving because Russia won't let the Ukrainians send their food out of the Black Sea.
Right, that's what I'm wondering. Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why the Ukrainians are firing on the Russian ships, is to get them to stop the blockade so that they can feed the world.
Yeah.
The other example would be North Korea, because North Korea has had some pretty heavy duty starvation. But that starvation, again, was politics.
Yeah.
So the question is starvation wrong? Or is it merely a result of political situations or the result of weather? And the wrongness is we don't like it.
Yeah. I like this way of putting it. So you can say either, is this again, an objective fact, or is this just a psychological fact? That's the question of the paper. And the person argues that, let's consider human beings. We have come here due to, natural selection, right? So if someone wants to say that there is these objective moral
and
facts,
survival of the fittest, you got to pop
exactly.
that in there
No, yeah,
because that's the whole point that we're here about, is the survival of the fittest
yeah.
rather than the survival of those who were weak, but they got survived because somebody told someone else that it was wrong to kill the weak.
So their question is, what is the relationship that natural selection, the process that has created humans, what relationship is that going to have if we imagine that there are these truth independent moral facts like murder is wrong in 99% of cases? What
Well,
is
there's
going to be the
certainly that true
relationship?
already in every government of the world. Every government has laws and rules, and almost every one of them, I'd say all of them, have rules about murder. So I don't understand the question. Because I mean, if God did make the rules, how are humans going to be different? Which is another side of the issue. Okay. If God made the rules or if God didn't make the rules, how would things be different one way or the other? The answer is God, whether he made the rules or not, is irrelevant to how humans behave.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the question is like, so what is going to be the relationship? And then then you say, okay, let's imagine that they're not truth independent, right? It kind of seems like these maxims that we have, like murder is wrong, stealing is wrong, and murder is especially wrong when it's to your family, right? That seems
Mm-hmm.
like extraordinarily helpful for a species to survive. So it kind of looks like,
Absolutely.
yeah, it
It,
kind of looks like our moral ideas are really just products of evolution and actually don't really correspond to anything. Truth, true, objectively true. Again, I think that again,
so
this has been
we
like the
think.
most interesting thing for me, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh, it's difficult because it's like it's a pretty heavy thing to concede to that it's just a product of our evolution. You know,
Actually, uh, while that is true, it's not evolution over millions of years, etc. It is the evolution of each individual human from their birth up until their adulthood, and maybe then they get some Buddhism, and then they evolve even further than that. Okay. And basically, you probably heard about this, and we've got several examples. One is some Indian children who were taken. Others were like story of Tarzan. I think Romulus and Remus were that way, the guys who did Rome. But there are other occasions to where a child is not raised by humans, he's raised in an animal way, and he has much more animal features in his style of living. That in fact, what we do as humans to our children is that we beat uh, the barbarian out of them. We beat that barbarian out of each one of the children, and one of the hammers that we use to beat the barbarian out of the child is by having these rules. Because each little barbarian child is not wise enough to figure out what's the right course of action, because the society that he's raised in is very complicated. Therefore, what we can say is that we actually, society needs these rules, and they need these rules hard and fast so that we can train our children up in the way that they should go, so when they are old they will kiss ass.
that's very Marxist.
Well, it's very Marx got it from the Bible. I'm just quoting the Bible. Right. In fact, the actual quote, I forgot where it is, but I think it may be in Psalms. So it's really old. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it, the way that he was trained. That's exactly what this is all about. It's not about the actuality of whether God did make the rules. It's whether we can convince people that God made the rules so that the people will obey the rules so that we can have a decent society because they're not smart enough on their own to figure out what the right way to live in the first place. So as we evolve, we need to give up the rules and start living wisely so that we can see that in this moment, it's better not to be angry at you. Then I can handle that. But if I can't, then I'm angry. And now I have to think, is it better for me to kill you now or what?
Oh man.
Okay, and that's when we need God because only God can stop an angry man.
I don't know. Bears are pretty good at it too, I'd say.
That's what the rules are for. The rules are for the ignorant. I got this, by the way, out of one of the suttas. This is the number 117 on right view. That sutta is actually seems to be the essential core of the teachings of the Buddha about that we when we have what he calls wrong view, and I'm not even sure that he would use the word wrong. Now that we're having this conversation, it would be a good idea to go back into the Pali to find out what is translated into the word wrong here, because the wrong view is basically the view that I can get away with anything. There is no cops, no mothers, no fathers, no priests, no rabbis, no karma machine, no gods, no heavens, nor hells, and I can go do anything I want to do to get what I want. Okay? And you see, that's the attitude of the drive-by shooter. That's the attitude of people who are going to wind up in prison if they're dumb, and in politics if they're smart. Or in business if they're really smart.
Or both. Or all
all,
three.
all
Yeah.
three, exactly. All right, so that's what we would refer to as wrong view in Buddhism, is the point I can get away with it. So the ordinary right view is the conservative view. I won't go so far as to say the philosopher's view, but it's certainly the religious view. And that is the view that no, you can't get away with it. We've got a God here, and we've got a police force, and we've got an army, and we've got teachers, and we've got social workers, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure you can't get away with it. We're even going to hire prison guards to lock you up. And that's the whole point about we need a God, is because that gives the people who are of ordinary right view justification that they can go kill people for killing. That's the whole catch-22 of capital punishment. If you're against killing, then you should not kill killers.
Right.
And yet the Christians are the ones who were deepest into the killing. They really like it. Why? Because they think God likes it.
Right. I mean, obviously, like I'd like to think that not all Christians. I don't know that many Christians, I'll be honest, but yeah, there's definitely Christians that are anti-capital punishment. As long as we're adding qualifications
I
to things.
swam in a sea as a child called Christianity, called Southern Bible Belt.
Right. No, but yeah, totally.
So I'm not saying that they have not changed. They have, but they've gotten worse, not better. They have not improved. They've gone down deeper into that same rat hole of uh, we are in charge because we believe that God made us in charge to make sure that you do what God's rules are. Where in fact, basically, that's just hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is making other people do the rules or keep the rules that we ourselves can't make or can't keep. We can make the rules, but we can't keep them. So we'll go make you keep them. That's the abortion, LGBTQ, racism, and all of that other stuff is based upon the fact that the Christians are not good enough, but they're at least better than somebody else.
Yeah.
And there's not much wisdom in there. So this is actually an important quality for you studying philosophy at such a deep level as this, is to recognize this whole third quality of that it's not even an issue of did God make the rules or not, or is God there or not. That's the irrelevancy
Yeah, I
of
don't
it
see
all.
it as being relevant. No.
That's there's another way of saying, that the atheists and the Christians actually argued for in the for more than 10 years back in the 2000s and whatnot with
Mhm.
old Klaus and Dawkins and the whole
I was
crowd.
really into that,
and
yeah.
and they never either side
Yeah,
convinced anyone
yeah,
of anything.
yeah.
That if you go to the university and bring the Christian in, then whatever the university folks thought. So if they were already all atheists, they stayed atheists. Nobody changed their mind in any of those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
But but the point about it is that they the whole question that was asked was the wrong question. The question that they were asking between the atheist and the Christians was, does God exist? And that's actually irrelevant. Think about it. The reality is that there is no reality to it. God does not come down the street with a marching band.
And even if they did, we wouldn't know if it truly is God. We wouldn't know if it's an illusion or not.
Let us say that if we can get pretty close to 99% sure, we can get some physicists in there to get that other extra 1%. The fact
Yeah, I
is
mean that's a
that
whole
we
lot of
don't
that.
even need the physicists now with all their scientific equipment because we right now got zero evidence. The only marching God does is down the street between the ears of some people. And so that's an irrelevant question for the atheists and the Christians to ask and
Right.
fight over. A
But
more relevant question, which is getting to it, is do I exist or not? That's a more relevant question, especially in the sense, do I exist as an entity strong enough that I survive death itself? In other words, what is the soul? Because if there is no soul, then God becomes irrelevant by choice, because the only reason why we need a God is we need some kind of law enforcement who's going to dig you up out of your grave just to beat your ass. And if there is no grave for a God to dig up and there's no ass to kick, there's no football to kick, there's nothing to put into heaven, nothing to put into hell because the guy actually died, then the whole quality of God and religion becomes irrelevant. What becomes more relevant is what happens when we're still alive, not what happens after we die. And that's the point about God, because while we're alive, there's no God. While we're alive, there is no evidence. That's where Nietzsche was coming from, is that God does not exist, but he said it in the wrong way by saying God is dead. What he was really means is that the God that I believed in is dead, or I've changed my mind. But then he added that kicker to it, therefore I am free, and he was not. That in fact, that was the problem even with Freud, that even though that Freud could do armchair empirical psychology and all of that, he didn't do any psychotherapy. He was not any good at curing anything. He was just observing and seeing what he saw without any solution to the problem. That's where the problem with God. So what if God is dead or alive? If you're still not free, because that's what happens to the atheists. They're not free, even though they don't believe the God that the Christians believe in. They still believe in something or another that makes the rules.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's really difficult to accept the idea that something like murder is wrong is just a fact about our psychology, right? I think that's just not something that anyone wants to think. I think we'd all prefer if murder actually really was wrong.
Well, a better way, though, for you to understand it personally without trying to convince anyone else. I'm not, this is just, I could go ahead and say it as the way that I have learned to see it.
Sure.
Is that it's abhorrent, and that I would not hit anyone necessarily, do so hard enough or with enough equipment to actually damage them. And that if I did damage someone, I would make very, very sure that they were well taken care of because of my own feelings. But I also recognize that these are my feelings, that I find it abhorrent, that I would not want to kill someone. I would rather be killed than kill. Why? Because if I get killed, then it's all over and I don't have to worry about it. If I kill someone, now I've got to deal with my own aftermath.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we can look at it like that, that it's abhorrent to me, and that most humans think that way most of the time. That's what makes it wrong, is because most of the people find it abhorrent most of the time. We don't like it. We don't like the idea of getting killed. But Stalin was the one who said that murder is wrong, but genocide is okay.
Yeah.
All right. So killing a lot of people in Ukraine, like there's a lot of people killed in Ukraine. Even if one of the dogs that lay around here, never mind that, like one of the humans that visit the house on a regular basis, he comes and visits and he dies here. Never mind whether somebody killed him or not. We've got a dead body on our hands right here, right now. That's abhorrent. And yet we can think of 120 kids get killed in Ukraine. That is not a here now situation. That's merely a concept. You and I only have a concept of 105 kids getting killed. We don't have 500 or 105 bodies laying here on our front porch all piled.
Maybe.
Okay, and so there's two different kinds of views then that we can begin to understand, and that is the view of our sensory awareness and actually putting up with killing and the results of killing, or whether it's merely a concept. And much of the time, the philosophers are thinking about killing and murder as a concept rather than something right here in front of us. I think that they would write better philosophy papers right after they got killed, or maybe right after they kill somebody, or maybe right after they're witnessing someone get killed, because that makes it real. That mostly it's just a concept, it's not real. That's the problem with God. So murder is why does God have a rule against murder when both the murder and the God are just merely mental concepts?
Yeah, I don't know. That seems like a really, I don't know about, like equating the concept of God with, the children that have been killed in Ukraine, saying that
But they're
that's
both just mental concepts, but what you can go to Ukraine and make it part of your reality.
Mm.
And that's different than merely conceptualizing about it, because you can't go to wherever God is and make him your reality. You can't do that because we don't know where he is. He doesn't give us that kind of information. With Ukraine, we've got maps.
Wow.
The Bible is not much of a map.
Well, it does tell you how to get there. To be fair.
Actually, does it? How?
Well, the first thing is you gotta die.
Oh, but all of the billions of
Or,
people who die don't get there, so that's not enough. And
or
not only that, but a whole lot of living people think they've gotten there.
I'm pretty sure they actually thought like, Dante's Inferno. Like they actually thought like this one mountain cave like somewhere. I don't remember exactly where, but that was actually where you went. It was like the pathway to hell or whatever, and like Dante
Oh,
actually
yes.
was there.
Uh-huh. But that's Middle Ages. If you look at it at various times in history, an example of that is in the Old Testament. There is the Sheol or the grave. Just whether there's resurrection or not is not even an issue. That was not part of the old Jewish culture, nor the Mediterranean culture. That the whole quality of afterlife and that kind of stuff, even early Greek mythology didn't have an afterlife. They just had the God immortal. Hades and the Styx and all of that kind of stuff was added to Greek mythology after Alexander went to India and got this Indian shtick. That
Um,
rebirth and reincarnation came out of India and it infected the religious mind state of the people in the Western culture.
I don't think that's true because Hesiod's works and days, like the main religious Greek mythology text that we have, that definitely had Hades, and that definitely had the underworld in it.
What date? Can you date Hades?
For Hesiod, that's the same time as Homer. I don't know if you know,
Oh, Homer's pretty early.
but it's definitely way before Alexander.
Yeah, but he was not before the date that's normally not normally the date that I have been given by a dear friend that I trust is
Yeah.
800 BC.
For Hesiod and Homer.
No, I'm not talking about Homer. I'm talking about the 800 BC, not Homer. He was 600 BC. 800 BC was when the Brahmins started using the concept of we are Brahmins and we deserve to be Brahmins and we do the Brahmin things and we take the Brahmin share of society because we, each individual one, was born Brahmin and we were born Brahmin because we were good in the past, and you were not born Brahmin because you were not good enough.
Right.
That's
So
where all of that came from, is justification for power, divine right of kings. That's it. That got started in about 800 BC. And so by 600 BC, it could have already arrived in Greece.
yeah, well, I'm sure that's probably where it came from. Plato thought he believed in reincarnation, like that was an important part of his philosophy as well, and that we've been a plant and we've been this and we've been that, which is fun. Um, I don't know. I don't know much about Indian theological history, honestly.
Well, the value in understanding it like that is to come back to the teachings of the Buddha for the point of that really we we need to keep our eyes open in this moment for what is dukkha and what is not dukkha.
Mm.
That's what it's really all about. Because if I can catch the dukkha in my mind before I go off and do a dukkha thing, then I'm better off. That this is what the teaching of the mind is the forerunner. The Brahmins taught that an action was like carving something into a tree or into a stone, and that verbal action was like writing it in the sand or perhaps on paper.
That's
Doesn't
interesting.
last long. And that mental was like writing it in the air or on water.
Interesting.
And the Buddha came back and says, no, that's absolutely upside down, that the mind is the forerunner, that you're not going to harm someone if you don't have the thought of harming them first.
Uh,
Okay, and so the dukkha is already in my mind. That's why I want to kill him, is I want to kill him to get the dukkha out of my mind. The problem is that killing him probably is not going to eliminate my dukkha. It's going to make it worse. That's an ignorant, stupid thing to do, is to kill someone because you're angry at something that they've done, because we're going to definitely create more trouble than we solve.
But let me ask you this, because I truly think that this is kind of like, you know, the central, or like, I don't know, essential question, because we were talking a lot about like conservative politics and conservative people in general, you know, and I think the most appropriate question that I would ask you is, how do we become friends with them, right? I think that's,
Pardon?
how do we become friends?
Well, let us say that the important thing is that each one of us get our own mind straightened out
Of course,
first.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Therefore, we are not going to be influenced by whenever they making their statement. We have to say, well, maybe, or anything like that, that we actually come to understand the real nature of one's own mind.
Mm-hmm.
The second point is that that's the job to be done.
Mm-hmm.
It is not your job to fix them. That's their job.
Sure.
But if one of those guys wants you to help them fix their mind, you can give them the same tools that I've given you, and they can work that way. But it's not your job to fix the world. That's where that's our society's point. That's what Christianity and in politics is all about. Christianity is dying because they are enwebbed in the vine of politics, especially the Republican Party, and it's what you could call a mutual deadly embrace. They will strangle each other. All right. The way to get out of that is for Christianity to separate itself from politics and go back to the original Christianity of it's up to each individual Christian to get his own mind straightened out. And when we have a whole bunch of Christians with proper minds, who needs the Republican Party? It's only because of the greed, ill will, and trying to force other people to do things the way that we want to do. So, as a Dhamma dude, we have to come out of saying, "Oh, I've got to help the world." No, you've got to get your own mind straightened out. And when you get your own mind straightened out, that's all you need. Let the world be. It's not your problem. We have been thinking that the world is our problem. We're taught that. Christians are taught that. Jews are taught that. Blacks are taught that from the other side. Okay, everybody thinks that the whole world and all of politics is something that everybody needs to be involved with. I like the story that imagine that the wagon has rolled down the hill and is now stuck in the creek. And so the guy who owns the wagon goes and gets everybody in town to help him to get his wagon out of the creek. But there's only room for each one to put their hand onto that wagon. And so you've got 100 people surrounding that wagon, each one of them pushing on that wagon, trying to get it out of the creek. Some on this side of the creek, some on that side of the creek, some in the creek, some on the truck, some under the truck, and everybody's pushing on that wagon. What's going to happen to that wagon? Is it going to come out of the creek, or is it just going to get wrecked? And that's the state of America and all kinds of politics. Is the more hands you have in pushing on it, the worse off it's going to be, because everybody's pushing from their point of view. And so the first thing we have to learn is, at least I'm going to stand back and enjoy the show. I don't have to cheer for one guy pushing or another guy pushing, because I know that they're pushing against each other. And so there's no real reason to get involved with any of that. That's what philosophy then, the real philosopher is the one who stops philosophizing about other people's philosophy and starts having a ball with his own.
I can dig that.
So there's a third one then. And that is that once you've come to the position that it's not your job to fix them, now you can begin to enjoy them the way they are.
Yeah.
and make friends with them and tease them and laugh with a big hearty belly laugh over some of the ridiculous things that they say, that they believe. You think God did it, huh? Yeah, Geraldine, God took you into that clothing store, I know. When in fact, no, it's actually our own desire. That's what it is. We are confused. We think if we want something bad enough, that God wants us to want it.
Interesting.
Because we are not strong enough, we're still being victimized, and so we need a champion, like a God, to make what I believe okay. But when I'm already cleaned out inside, and I'm no longer a victim, and I am now a champion of my own thoughts, I don't need a God to back me up. I can see things the way they really are.
Yeah, going back to something that you said earlier, I think that is actually a super relevant point, in terms of, like, they've done studies where they like had, they I can't remember the study exactly, but they present people with like a certain issue or whatever, and then they present two arguments for it. And, one will be completely logically unsound, doesn't make any sense, and the other one will be well put together or whatever. It's not actually really about whether or not the things that like has more, that convince people more, is not going to be whether or not the argument is actually well put together and like logically sound. It's really comes down to who speaks more. And that's it. That's how you win an argument. You just talk more than the other person, and you've won. That's human psychology. It's amazing. It's beautiful.
That's why I always win arguments.
But I mean, if you think about it, like, it's totally true. Like, I mean, it's just how it works. Like, you just keep going, and it's like, well, there you go.
Mm-hmm. Well,
that person's really talking. They must really know what they're talking about.
Or they really want you to believe that they know what they're talking about. Okay, so there still has the quality of and the other people don't know that. Only individual ones will know in their own mind if they look. But most of us don't even look for that feeling of insecurity that I'm talking because I'm afraid that the other person may get a point in or whatever like that. It's a matter of knowing one's own mind. That's the first step, and then knowing that what we do have is good enough and strong enough that I don't have to fix other people.
Yeah.
I can leave them alone. Not only that, but what I know is big enough and strong enough that I not only don't have to fix those other people, I can enjoy them the way they are.
Yeah.
Now that's the last point, is that I don't care whether you're wrong or not. I really think that your position is hilarious.
That's amazing.
That's why I always make things into a joke like that. The example would be, Descartes,
Sure.
I think is the way that they say his name,
Yeah.
had the point of, he actually did it in Latin. I can't do the Latin. I remembered it ends in ergo est, but
Cogito.
yeah, cogito ergo est. I think, therefore I am. But he got that wrong too. How he should have said it was, I think, therefore I think I am.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. But I think, therefore I am, that there's no therefore there.
Yeah.
Thought is, if you've got a thought, then the thought is that I am. It's not that the thought makes me exist. It's the thought of me existing that makes me exist.
Yeah, and that's actually something that I caught on to this week from watching another Buddha person. Was they mentioned that like it's so interesting that we think that we're brought up, and I especially noticed this with myself with doing philosophy stuff. We think that we have to keep thinking in order to exist, right? That if we stop, then it's like, oh no, like we're gonna die or something. So it's like we have to keep reaffirming that ego identity, by continuing to think and continuing to figure out who we are, and continuing to identify, like, I play guitar all the day because I'm like, I'm a guitar player. It's what I do. I have to keep affirming this identity, and I've definitely noticed that with myself too. And I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. And it's the same thing. Like like I said, I've been doing all these philosophy papers, so I was like, spent like 3 days straight just doing a philosophy paper, right? And then like on the last day, I didn't get any sleep, right? Because my mind was still just going, it couldn't stop. Because once that thinking is in there, when you're habituated yourself so strongly to keep figuring this out, that it's like, that's what it is now,
Uh-huh. I think that part of that has to do with when we are children, when we learn things, they feel difficult, especially since the parents are pushing us. And so we get into the habit then that new things to learn are difficult, and we don't begin to go back to the way that we were in early childhood and see everything as an adventure, everything is a toy, everything is to be investigated through play. And so we begin to make it into work. So that also is true with your philosophy papers, is that you've got them into work. You got to figure it out
Yeah.
rather than coming to it from a very playful position. That playing with it will make it a whole lot easier. And not only that, but you'll probably have a shorter paper that's got more oomph to it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, to be fair, it was weird. I was actually enjoying it the more it went on. And like, I was just getting really into, like, going through the text and stuff. And like, just feels cool after a while, I guess, once you get into that understanding, but then, yeah, of course, the not being able to sleep thing is very unpleasant.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So learning then to come back
Mm.
into a different kind of thought process. That in fact, this is something that I talk to the students about to make sure that they understand. We use the word thought, and we almost always use the word thought for a particular kind of thought, a verbal thought, or a discursive thought, or a didactic thought, or words that we are talking to ourselves in. But there are many other ways of spending mind moments because we have the other five senses. So when you're actually looking at something, you're not thinking about it. You look, think, look, think. Well, that looking is a mind moment that I would call a kind of thinking, but you're doing it directly with your observation of the mind. We do that with music too, that oftentimes when you're actually listening to the music, we are not thinking verbal thoughts, but we don't know that because we're too busy listening to the music. If you start looking at what the mind is doing, you can see that all the mind is actually listening to that music rather than talking about it. But if you do that, then you begin to talk about listening to the music. And so it gets kind of, um, how to say, interesting in that regard to recognize that there are many different kinds of thoughts. Another example of that is when someone says that I am anxious or I have stress. How do they know unless they spend a few mind moments actually observing the anxiety? And then the next mind moments are spent thinking about the anxiety by putting it into language. It's very much like the whole quality that you've heard this before, that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, we're living a movie. which means that we need about 24,000 words a second. And
That's a
we
great
can't
point.
keep
I
up.
like that.
And we can't keep up. And so the verbal is almost always behind. Back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, before television came, they would do sports on the radio, which doesn't make a lot of sense, especially boxing matches. How can you do a boxing match on the radio? Is because you have an announcer who is giving what he could call his best would be a blow by blow description of what's happening.
I think they still do that, at least for baseball. I'm pretty sure.
Pardon?
I think they still do that.
They actually, even though they've got video now, they still have those announcers.
But even on the radio, like, I'm pretty sure they still do blow by blow. Because I remember being a kid, like, listening to, like, a Giants game or something, you know? Like, yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But we do that kind of thing ourselves on the inside, even though we're there watching and listening and seeing our own living movie, our own television with our senses. Still, we have this running blow by blow description that's going on inside the discursive mind.
Yeah.
And so what we learn with Anapanasati is to begin to change that discursive mind into, instead of talking about something else, that we begin to focus it on what our senses are saying. So we actually do an actual begin to do a running dialogue rather than having the action of the boxers there while the announcer is talking about dinner with his wife, right? No, we want that announcer to actually talk about the boxing that's going on. Okay, so this way, that's the Anapanasati, is begin to talk to ourselves about breathing, about how we feel. We begin to notice that and begin to talk that way in the here now by using that verbal stuff, because basically we have been talking ourselves into feeling bad our whole lives. Now it's time to talk ourselves into feeling good by being good in this present moment. That's where it becomes really valuable. Once we see that, we can recognize, oh, I can choose for myself how I'm going to feel. I do not have to be subject to all of the old bad habits that I think came, or that's who I am. That we either think that we got it from society or our parents, or in many cases, they say, God made me this way. No, God didn't do it. Parents didn't do it. The society didn't do it. We chose to do it that way. That two kids can grow up together in the same household, almost identical twins, and wind up being in different political parties. So it's what the individual child does. And if we see that we do that on our own, ignorantly as we were growing up, now we can do it wisely. Now we can come back and reevaluate and start looking at what's going on in this moment and begin to see the things right now are quite nice. Things right this very minute are not dangerous. Right now, there is no murder going on. Why should we bother talking about murder going on, or
I know, it's
whether or
so
not?
unfortunate.
I know there's no murders.
Well, yeah.
Right now, right here in your world and in mine, there are no murders. All of the murders that are going on, the ones that you had there, were in your mind. Those were conceptual murders, not real ones. And so by living in the real world is actually quite marvelous. It's the conceptualized world is full of gods and murders and rules and fights and arguments and all that kind of stuff, is because of concepts. But the reality of the moment is quite nice. And so spending time in this present moment and get yourself all cleaned out of all of that old conceptualized stuff, that means that when you do it well, you can deal with people who still live in concepts, but you don't have to buy their concepts anymore. You can stay real by staying in the senses, by doing the kind of thinking that has to do with what's happening right here, right now, rather than what they're thinking about.
Well, I'm curious. I actually heard you talking about the similar thing with someone else, and I'm actually really curious to think what you think of something else. Another technique that I heard from another Dhamma teacher that has actually been beneficial to me. I'd say. I think. I don't know. It's too early to tell. I'm still checking. But I think overall it's a good idea. So I had a previous experience like a couple weeks ago, like just kind of an unpleasant thing that happened. Doesn't matter the specifics. Something unpleasant happened, and it really wasn't a huge deal, but I could tell as time went on, I was
Let me
building.
say, just as a point, that something happened, and you chose that it was unpleasant.
Right. So I started building more and more of a story around it, and started attaching it more and more to my identity, and thinking like I'm this kind of person, and like going back and attaching it to like old memories that I've had or whatever. And so I realized that was happening, and that I was attaching it to these old memories. And I heard a technique where I was like, it's a good idea to get yourself into a good mindset, right? Clean out the mind, and then visit those memories as you would see them now with this clearer mind, so that you can go through, like things that happened in your childhood and go through them and be like, let's apply this mindset to this, and damn, I think that is really effective at being able to deal with that old stuff, and like being able to, because it's like, I feel like for me, just continuing because present moment is great, and I but those memories continue to live on in that way, I feel, even when I continue to like do present moment stuff. So I find it effective to go back and kind of work through that. Yeah.
Ajahn Sumedho calls that wise reflection.
Right. Okay.
Okay, now we can know wise reflection or after we've got the mind cleaned out, because if the mind is not cleaned out, going back into the past is going to bring up the same feelings that we had in the past, or something even worse than that. And so it'll bring up the guilt. We remember doing something terrible in the past, and we bring it up with guilt.
Yeah.
With wise reflection, or with the mind that's clear, we can remember doing that with the thought of, that's not me, that's not who I am, I don't do that kind of thing anymore, because I can see with wisdom that causes trouble, causes problems. And so that's not who I am.
Yeah.
And so that's the wise reflection that has that value. And it also has the value of renunciation, but I have to make sure that we're talking about that there's two kinds of renunciation. There is the ordinary renunciation, and then there is the noble renunciation. The ordinary renunciation is like ordination, vows, talking about from now on, I'm not going to do this, vows of poverty, vows of celibacy, vows of silence, vows of that kind of thing, almost always done in ceremonies, is done as an ordinary kind of thing, and it has ordinary values to it. But the noble renunciation is by reflecting upon our own past and recognizing that that's not who I am. I don't do that kind of stuff anymore. That's the noble renunciation of, wow, I'm not going to do that anymore.
But I mean, I was thinking of it, applying it to more of a context where it's like, someone calls you something that, really upsets you or something like that, and being able to come through at the mind where it's like, they just said a word, there was just noise being made, it's that really didn't matter, like it was, or whatever, like
Okay.
how,
Exactly. Precisely.
yeah.
And how I felt that time, I don't feel that way now. I don't feel
Mm-hmm.
like that anymore.
Yeah.
That's the important point also, is not only that somebody called you a name, but that you didn't like it back then, but now you're not that person.
Mm-hmm.
And now that kind of language doesn't bother you.
Yeah, well, still need some wise reflection,
You.
But yeah,
Yes, that's wise reflection,
yeah. Okay, cool.
and it's a Buddhist concept. But the ordinary person is not going to do wise reflection. He's going to be doing an ordinary reflection. He's just going to remember. And so when we have the wise reflection, that has to do with that then renunciation. Because otherwise, what we do is we feel guilty. I've had students ask, what do we do about guilt? And this is the answer, is that that's not who I am anymore. I don't do that kind of stuff. I don't feel those ways. That I can renounce that. And so therefore, there's no reason to feel guilty now about something that happened back then because it happened to some other person some other time. That's not who I am now. There is also, from that perspective, the Pali words are hari and opata. Now, hari basically means the same thing as shyness or embarrassment. And opata is more of guilt that's real guilt in the sense of the shame and embarrassment of that has to do then with the renunciation that we have to go through that. To where the other kind is more about being shunned.
Mm.
Okay, that we don't want to be shunned because we have done something that other people disapprove of, as opposed to I'm renouncing this because I disapprove of it for myself doing it. And when we learn that distinction, then we can deal with both of them easily to figure out that if you want other people to not know something that you've done, is it out of shame and being shunned, or is it out of real regret, real remorse? Because that's the one that gives us the actual power to change. The other one, the shame, the being shunned, that only gives us power to hide, not to fix.
Yeah.
And so even when somebody's calling you a name, if you feel bad, that would be enough to say, well, I'm not going to feel bad about that anymore. That in fact, in recent years, I've been called a bully.
All right.
And I really like that one because Buddha was a bull. He was a bull elephant. He was strong. And so when somebody calls me a bully, that means that, oh, that just means that you're weak and you see me as strong. Now, there's two kinds of bullies. One is the kind of bully who is bullying someone in order to get something. And the other one is the bully who is a bully just because he is right and unmovable.
Interesting.
And you can't get something from some bullies because they don't see it. You know, they've got their mind together or whatever to see it like that. So yeah, we can find any derogatory word and turn it around. In Sutta number 12, in the lion's roar, by the way, the Buddha says, when when Sariputta came to talk about this guy complaining about him, he says, the Buddha responded was that though he intended to blame me, he praised me instead. That example of the bully, that's turning that around. The guy calls you a bully because he wants to blame you, put you down, tell you you're a bad person. You say, yeah, that's right. Thank you very much for recognizing that strength, that power, that internal fire. If somebody called me a wuss, I might feel bad, but I maybe can be able to turn that one around also. So that's how you can begin to think of it is that when somebody calls you a name, the reason that you felt bad was because you used their definition of that word rather than making it useful for yourself. To say, yeah, he's right. I am that. It's an attribute. It's a quality.
Totally, yeah. That's a nice way of looking at it. See the positive.
And so that's part of the renunciation is renouncing his definition of the words. You put your own in there so that you can wind up feeling the way you want to feel.
Yeah.
So this is another way of looking at wise reflection. The wise reflection is look at how the words are used and recognize that, yeah, he may be right, but he's actually bragging and praising me when he intends to say derogatory things. By the way, that was said by this thing that we're talking about with the Buddha is that the guy was complaining because the Buddha had no supernormal states, that all he taught was suffering and the end of suffering. But he taught that well, and a lot of people were getting that point, but he didn't have any power at all. And the
Just
Buddha
an
was saying,
ordinary person.
just an ordinary man. Exactly, no supernatural powers,
Just
but
another
that
guy.
he does have the ability to help other people not be in dukkha.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is actually a pretty good place for us to stop. I've really enjoyed this conversation with you, and
Too.
I know that morality has been a major point of not just philosophy, but then they make it an assignment for you.
Bastards.
But when the mind is clear, then morality is irrelevant because you're not doing anything that's going to harm anyone because you don't want anything. You're not in harm.
Well, if I could put one last point in there about philosophy, I'd say philosophy is 100% what led me to Buddhism. I don't think I would have been that interested in Buddhism if I wasn't interested in philosophy, especially the ancient Greek philosophers, and talking about, like Plato or Socrates being like, what is the good, right? Something like that. Like, what is the end that we should align ourselves to? Is it money? Well, people don't want money in them for itself. So what do they want it for? They want it for, so then you get all these things, generally say happiness, right? So that completely restructured my whole life. I mean, truly, like I stopped doing so many things because I was like, okay, why am I doing this? I think I'm doing this because I think it makes me happy. And I can see that it's actually not making me happy, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not going to do this anymore, right? Because it's like, yeah. So I mean, and then when I came to Buddhism, it was like applying that same thing. Okay, like, and then Buddhism just hit it right on the mark. It's like this is about what is life about? Have a good time.
Well, in that regard, Buddhism does have answers, but mostly the answer is never mind. That's a relevant question.
Right.
That's the answer to most of the questions. Is we don't need to know that.
Yeah.
All we need to know is enough to let's be happy. We need to know enough to know that right here, right now is safe and secure, and we're okay. And when we got that, then a lot of those other questions about who did morality and all of that kind of stuff is not important. What really is important is do you feel good enough to behave well? Because all morality is based upon, or let us say all of immorality is based upon bad feelings. White collar crimes is from greed. Brawls are from ill will. It's all done in ignorance. And so when we're wise and we don't want anything, then morality is a non-issue. It's an irrelevancy. Just like gods and heavens and hells and rebirths and reincarnations and all that stuff, it's all irrelevant for right now. If you're enjoying this moment, if you're not enjoying the moment, then some of that stuff may become important to you. But if you're okay right now, then we don't need any of that stuff. We don't need a God or to figure out whether there's a God or not. If there is a God, he'll show up soon enough. We'll make friends with him when he comes. But based upon the evidence for the past 5,000 years, I'm not in a hurry.
But I mean, again, even if like some, exact depiction came out, we wouldn't even be able to tell because it's like, who knows if it's not just the alien laser beaming illusion into your mind.
Well, physicists know quite a lot about laser beams. Physicists, philosophers don't. Philosophers, laser beams are a concept. For physicists, they're real things.
Right, but they could laser beam the physicists too, right?
I don't know of any surgery that's been done by laser like that is doing the kind of effects that you're talking about. That's exactly the same kind of thinking of people don't want the COVID-19 vaccine because it's got little radio transmitters inside of that.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And these guys don't even know the electronics behind those things. They think that those transmitters are in a liquid. Sorry, those things have to have a great big needle that have to be put under the skin. They're almost the size of a grain of rice or a grain of sand. And they don't go through those thin needles that are done with vaccines. And so just the physical logic of the kind of stuff. Well, the same thing with lasers. They don't know how to do lasers that they can make you jump like a chicken, but we can use hypnosis to make you jump like a chicken. We can talk you into it and let you jump because you want
Or
to jump like a chicken.
directly control your mind. Have you heard about those things where it's like they hook electrodes up to your mind or whatever, and then they can control your arm, and then when they're doing that, like they'll have it so that they'll make the button go or whatever. I think it's with like electronic arms, but they'll have the person's arm go, and then they'll ask them, "Why did you just raise your arm?" And then they'll start, giving all these reasons as to why they just raised their arm, but they didn't raise their arm. The control on the thing that was controlling them made them raise their arm. But it's just the point that we don't know when we're being controlled, because that's just not something that we could know.
That guy did because he was in that scientist's office with all of that equipment hooked up to him.
Right.
You are sitting in your room with none of that stuff.
Right.
Except
as far as I know.
No, wait a minute. What you know is what your own ears, it's your concepts is what you know about being hooked up to all of that stuff.
That's a good point. Yeah, no, I like that a lot. Yeah, totally. That ultimate reality is here now.
But a good electrical engineer will walk in there and say, no, you're not hooked up to anything.
Yeah, totally.
It's only the philosophers that are out there saying, well, what if? Because they don't know the physics behind it.
Yeah, well, like technology gets pretty good pretty fast.
Yes, it does, but not as fast as your mind.
We'll see.
That in fact, the right way to do it is keep track of what Neuralink is doing, Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Okay, because they're trying to help people regain control over their limbs.
That's
But the Christians, when they hear about that research, they'll say mind control.
right. Well, I mean, because that's the danger of it, right? Because it can be like any technology can be used for good or it can be used for bad.
That's another what ifism.
It's just
What
true.
about it? It's not. Well, no, it's not there yet. When it is there yet, you'll still have to go to the hospital to have it implanted, and you'll know whether you're doing that or not.
Yeah. Ideally, they can still get you in their sleep.
Well, who are the they out there that are putting these very expensive little
Yeah,
micro
no,
pieces
I
in
don't
you?
want.
And
I'm not.
we
Yeah, I'm
have
not
to
trying to be
really have to
conspiracy
think things.
theorists.
Yeah, we really have to look at the reality of the situation so that we don't have to go down those rabbit holes of what ifs. Right now, you're okay.
I'm not worried about it. Because
You
if they're
just spent
controlling,
5 minutes trying to convince me to be worried about it.
no, that's not at all. Not at all. I just, I just think it's a reality. It's a possibility. I mean, it's just a
Not this year's
fact.
possibility.
Sorry.
Not this year's possibility.
Fair enough.
AI don't run the world yet. They can't even make them get a good car going, but they
No,
will.
they will.
So we don't have to worry about all of that. What we only have to worry about is right here, right now. And if that stuff comes into your right here, right now, then we can deal with it. But right here, right now, we don't have to deal with it. It's just merely a concept.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely not
So
wrapping this up.
I know. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up with that point that
Okay, sure.
the reality is right here, right now. And the more we're in the right here, right now, enjoying it, then the closer we are to reality, the closer we are to happiness, the closer we are to satisfaction. And the further we get away from the here now, the further into concepts we get, and the more dangerous we can conceive.
Yeah. I'll say, like, the last thing for me to say, one thing that I have realized that it's like incredible. It's like actually how small our minds are, compared to like everything else that's going around. It's incredible. It's just such a like a little thing or whatever, and we're just...
I know we are so tiny and so vulnerable, and yet I'm surviving.
Yeah.
The world is not out to destroy me. The world is out to support me, and I accept that support happily without having to ask too many questions about it. You can just accept reality as it is. Well, let's go ahead and finish. I'm really glad that you called. I like the approach that we have together about you learning the Dhamma from this intellectual approach, but it also would be very valuable for you to, to actually practice, to
Trust me.
actually keep getting these unwholesome thoughts out of the mind and come back to the reality is right now everything's okay. Right now everything is fine. Right now, no place to go and nothing to do. And that's especially valuable right after you finish those papers. And the mind is still grinding and turning and earning. You just occasionally have thought, never mind about all of that. I could just relax.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
We'll
right,
see.
then. I'll see you around.
Okay. We'll see you soon.
See you.